The vicious Tellarite Warmaster Antares sneered arrogantly at Earth's pitiful defense fleet, not knowing humanity's most ancient and terrifyingly brutal warbeasts would soon be unleashed from secret stasis to rip his army to bloody shreds. It was the year 2357. Humanity had colonized a dozen star systems in a desperate bid for survival, but the ruthless Tellarite Dominion wanted the upstart humans crushed back into galactic obscurity. On the bridge of Earth's flagship Indomitable, Lieutenant Timothy Stevens stood at tense attention. Alarms blared. The main view screen showed a massive Tellarite armada dropping out of warp, led by the Wrath of Antares, a planet-killing dreadnought. The EDF's ragtag fleet of ancient warships and jury-rigged freighters looked pathetically tiny in comparison. Warlord Antares appeared on screen, smirking cruelly. "Your nothing race and your laughable army will burn, and your worlds with them," Antares gloated viciously. High Commander Vance of the EDF tried to open negotiations, but Antares cut the transmission. The dreadnought's supercharged plasma cannons fired. The Indomitable's shields evaporated in seconds. Gaping holes were blasted in its hull. Explosions hurled Timothy off his feet as the crippled flagship reeled and belched flame. Screams of the dying filled his ears. The Tellarites had to be stopped here, or a dozen human colony worlds would burn. Billions would die in agony as their flesh melted. Their cruel empire would spread like a cancer. As Timothy staggered upright on the bridge, warning lights flashing and girders groaning, he knew what had to be done. It was time for humanity to unleash the nightmares of ancient Earth, foes that had once driven humanity to the edge of extinction. Monsters of fang and claw from the dawn of time, before humans were born. Abominations that killed and fed and could never be tamed, only aimed at a foe. It might damn humanity's soul to release them. But it was time to cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Timothy felt the coppery taste of blood in his mouth as he pushed a sparking control panel off his legs. The view screen flickered, Antares' cruel face taunting them between bursts of static. The once proud EDF fleet was in ruins, only a few crippled ships remaining amid the expanding debris fields that had been powerful cruisers and carriers just minutes before. "Your species ends today, Terran filth," Antares crowed. "Watch as your last hopes are extinguished." The dreadnought's cannons glowed, preparing to unleash another devastating salvo to finish off humanity's broken defenses. Timothy dragged himself over to Commander Vance, who gripped a fractured bulkhead, his face pale. "Sir, we have to use them. It's our only chance," Timothy growled through gritted teeth. Vance looked at him, horrified understanding dawning in his eyes. He hesitated, the terrible implications of Timothy's suggestions sinking in. Then another wave of enemy fire hammered into the Indomitable, nearly hurling them off their feet again. Klaxons screeched, threatened core breaches. Vance's jaw tightened and he gave a single sharp nod. Timothy raced across the rubble-strewn bridge, sparks raining down from ruptured conduits overhead. He reached the massively reinforced hatch at the rear, punching in his override code with shaking fingers. He slammed his palm on the biometric scanner. Identity confirmed. The immense blast door groaned open. Heart pounding, Timothy charged into the cavernous chamber beyond. Emergency lights flickered dimly, illuminating 6 towering cryostasis pods, each one the size of a small warship. Frost rimed their armored surfaces, and hazy green readouts showed vital signs. Barely restrained power thrummed within. Timothy input a string of commands into the control panel, his commands overriding safety locks and containment protocols. A deep, bone-shaking rumble built as the Titan pods stirred to life. Supercooled mist roiled out as the front sections ground open. Piercing reptilian eyes flashed in the shadows. Colossal forms shifted, scales scraping, wings unfurling. The dragons of ancient myth, the nightmares of primitive man, took their first breaths in millennia. On the Tellarite flagship's bridge, Antares' triumphant laughter faltered as an officer urgently directed his attention to the main monitor. Gargantuan shapes were launching from the Indomitable's hangar bays, hurtling towards the Tellarite fleet. Antares zoomed in, disbelieving. Shock turned to terror as he beheld 6 impossibly huge creatures, their hides glistening with indestructible scales, their jaws bristling with sword-length fangs, their tails lashing powerfully. One of the beasts, a midnight black monster with wings that blotted out the stars, opened its cavernous maw and let loose a universe-shaking roar of primordial fury. That awful sound was like the death knell of galaxies. The dragons accelerated to impossible speeds, wreathed in shimmering coronas of exotic energy. "Fire! Fire everything!" Antares screamed, real fear in his voice for the first time. The Tellarite ships opened up, every weapon unleashing storms of destructive energies, filling space with searing light. Surely nothing could survive such an apocalyptic onslaught. But the dragons came on, their scales absorbing the terrible energies, shrugging off gigatons of firepower like raindrops. The dragons reached the Tellarite ships. Titanic claws tore through meters of battle steel like paper. Jaws closed around bridge towers, ripping them free in explosions of debris and bodies. White-hot dragonfire blasted from toothy maws, melting through the strongest armor in seconds, vaporizing alien warriors by the thousands. The dragons moved among the fleet with a terrible, savage grace, rending and crushing, unleashing the wrath of an ancient apex predator upon the upstart Tellarites. But the dragon's true target was the wrath of Antares itself. The mighty flagship, the Doom of Worlds, found itself swarmed by all 6 titans. Dragonfire, hot as the core of suns, melted its thickest hull plates to slag in moments. Claws like mountain ranges peeled open its hull, exposing entire decks to the void. The dragons bellowed in bloodthirsty glee as they tore the mighty warship apart. On the bridge, warning sirens blared, and crew stations exploded around Antares as he watched the unstoppable monsters ravage his beautiful ship. Structural integrity alarms howled as the hull stress reached catastrophic levels. The astrogation officer shouted that the engines were failing, the power core was rupturing. But Antares barely heard him. He stared fixedly at the hideous beasts of darkest legend dismantling his flagship, unable to process the incomprehensible sight. Then, in a final flare of defiance, he grabbed the intercom and screamed, "Ramming speed, I will not be humiliated by these primitives and their pet monsters. For the Dominion." The wrath of Antares convulsed like a dying beast as the dragons tore into its hull, their claws and fangs ripping through armor plates as if they were made of paper. On the bridge, pandemonium reigned. Consoles erupted in geysers of sparks, showering the crew with searing debris. The deck bucked and heaved, hurling Tellarite warriors across the room to smash into bulkheads with bone-crushing force. Antares clung to the command chair, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with a fear he had never known. The dragon's roars shook the very atoms of the ship, resonating in the marrow of his bones. He barked orders, his voice cracking, demanding his crew to fight back, to unleash every weapon, to do something. But deep down he knew it was futile. These monsters were beyond anything the Tellarite Dominion had ever faced. In a last, desperate gambit, Antares ordered all power diverted to the Singularity Cannon, a weapon so terrifying, so devastating, that even he had been hesitant to use it. But now, with his ship and his dreams of conquest crumbling around him, he had no choice. The lights on the bridge dimmed as the Singularity Cannon drank in every erg of power the ship had left. Outside, the obsidian dragon, a behemoth with scales as dark as the void, and eyes that burned like the heart of a star, latched onto the wrath of Antares. Its talons, each as long as a warship, shredded gun turrets and sensor arrays as if they were made of tinfoil. "Fire," Antares whispered, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of destruction. The Singularity Cannon discharged with a silent scream that tore at the mind, a beam of pure darkness that seemed to consume the very fabric of reality. It struck the obsidian dragon dead on. For a moment, the beast was engulfed in a sphere of utter nothingness, a hole in the universe itself. Then the sphere collapsed and the dragon was gone. Antares let out a triumphant roar, a primal, guttural sound that was equal parts relief and bloodlust. He had done it. He had slain the beast. Reality shattered. The space around the Wrath of Antares warped and twisted, the starfield stretching and distorting into impossible shapes. The singularity cannon, in its desperation to kill the dragon, had torn a hole in the space-time continuum. Alarm shrieked as the ship's hull groaned under stresses it was never meant to endure. Structural integrity collapsed, the mighty dreadnought's spine snapping like a twig. Escape pods blasted away in all directions as Tellarite warriors abandoned their posts, fleeing for their lives. Antares stumbled from his chair, his world spinning around him. He had to get to his escape pod. He had to survive. A hand emerged from the rift. A hand the size of a moon, its talons wrapped in eldritch energy. It seized the Wrath of Antares, the ship that had been Antares' pride and joy, his instrument of conquest, and crushed it like an eggshell. The obsidian dragon emerged from the rift, its scales pulsing with the energies of dimensions unknown. It had not been killed by the singularity cannon. It had been transformed, its already immense power amplified 1,000-fold. With a roar that shook the foundations of the universe, the dragon ripped the Wrath of Antares in two, the once mighty dreadnought shattering into 1,000,000 pieces, 1,000,000,000 shards of metal and composite scattering across the void. And Antares, the great warlord, the scourge of 100 worlds, screamed as he was pulled into the rift, his body stretching and distorting, his very atoms unraveling in the face of forces beyond his comprehension. As the shattered remnants of the once mighty Wrath of Antares drifted lifelessly in the void, Warlord Antares tumbled helplessly through the vacuum in his escape pod. His face was a rictus of impotent rage and utter disbelief at the impossible defeat he had just suffered at the hands of the primitive Terrans and their monstrous dragons. The dragons themselves made short, brutal work of the remaining Tellarite ships, tearing through their hulls with fang and claw, melting them to slag with white-hot dragonfire. In a matter of minutes, the once proud Tellarite armada was reduced to nothing more than drifting wreckage and flash-frozen corpses. On the bridge of the battered but unbroken Indomitable, Timothy Stevens and the surviving EDF crew watched in exhausted awe as the dragons returned to the hangar bay, their titanic forms still crackling with eldritch energy. For a moment the bridge was silent, save for the sparking of damaged consoles and the distant groans of the wounded. Then a new alarm blared, jarring in its urgency. The view screen flickered to life, displaying a sight that made Timothy's blood run cold. A second Tellarite fleet was dropping out of warp, easily twice the size of the one they had just defeated, and at its head was a ship unlike any the humans had ever seen, a cyclopean monstrosity bristling with strange, organic-looking weapons, its hull pulsing with sickly bioluminescence. The screen flickered again and a new figure appeared, a female Tellarite, her beauty as cold and imperious as the void of space itself. Her voice, when she spoke, was like honey laced with venom. "I am Empress Xanthia, supreme ruler of the Tellarite Dominion," she purred, her lips curving in a cruel smile. "Your victory over Antares is impressive, but ultimately meaningless. He was merely an expendable pawn sent to test your defenses, and now that I have seen your dragons," her eyes glittered with avarice, "I will claim them as my own, to be used as living weapons in my conquest of the galaxy." Xanthia leaned forward, her gaze boring into Timothy's. "Surrender the dragons to me immediately, or face the full might of my empire. You have no hope of victory." Timothy felt all eyes on the bridge turn to him. He glanced at Commander Vance, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Timothy turned back to the screen, his voice steady and his eyes hard. "Empress Xanthia, I am Lieutenant Timothy Stevens of the Earth Defense Force, and I speak for all humanity when I say, go to hell." With that, he cut the transmission. The bridge crew erupted in cheers, but Timothy silenced them with a look. He turned to Vance, his face grim. "Sir, the dragons are spent. They need time to recover. We can't hold off a fleet that size for long." Vance nodded, his expression bleak. Then his eyes widened, a sudden spark of desperate hope flickering in their depths. "The Gordian Gambit," he whispered. "It's our only chance." Timothy felt a chill run down his spine. The Gordian Gambit, a top-secret weapon of last resort, named after the ancient legend of Alexander the Great and the Gordian knot, a weapon so powerful and unpredictable that it had been banned by every intergalactic treaty and convention. A weapon that could save humanity, or doom the entire galaxy. Vance turned to the crew, his voice ringing with authority. "Prepare the Gordian Protocol. Divert all power to the Singularity Core. And may God have mercy on us all." As the crew scrambled to obey, Vance pulled Timothy aside. "Stevens, I need you to buy us time. Take a squadron of fighters and keep that fleet occupied. Do whatever it takes." Timothy saluted sharply. "Yes, sir." He turned to go, then paused. "And the dragons?" Vance's face was carved from stone. "Pray they recover in time, Lieutenant. Pray they recover in time." Vance's face was etched with grim determination as he turned to Timothy. "Do it, Lieutenant. Unleash the Gordian Gambit. It's our last hope." Timothy nodded sharply, his heart pounding as he raced through the Indomitable's battle-scarred corridors. He reached the deepest, most secure vault in the ship, placing his hand on the biometric scanner. The vault door hissed open, revealing a small, unassuming device thrumming with barely contained energy. Timothy grabbed the Gordian Gambit and sprinted to the hangar bay. The dragons were there, their scales still crackling with residual energy from their battle with the Tellarite fleet. They looked up as Timothy approached, ancient eyes filled with wisdom and understanding. "I need your help," Timothy said, his voice raw with emotion. "We have one last chance to stop Xanthia, but it comes at a terrible cost." The obsidian dragon, the mightiest of them all, stepped forward. It lowered its massive head, allowing Timothy to attach the Gordian Gambit to its scales. The device pulsed faster, glowing with an eerie light. With an earth-shaking roar, the obsidian dragon took flight, soaring out of the hangar bay and into the void of space. Timothy watched it go, a lump in his throat. He knew the dragon understood the stakes, understood the sacrifice it was about to make. On the bridge of her flagship, Empress Xanthia watched the lone dragon approach, a sneer of contempt on her lips. "Pathetic," she spat. "They send a single beast against the might of my empire. Open fire, tear it apart." A storm of plasma and laser fire erupted from the Tellarite fleet, filling the void with deadly light. But the obsidian dragon wove and dodged through the onslaught with preternatural grace, its scales deflecting the energy blasts. Xanthia's eyes widened in disbelief as the dragon drew closer, the Gordian Gambit pulsing with blinding intensity. She opened her mouth to scream new orders, but it was too late. The Gordian Gambit detonated. A blinding flash of light erupted, a roar that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. Space itself warped and twisted, stars blinking out and reforming in strange new configurations. Then silence. As the light faded, Timothy stared at the view screen in shock. Where Xanthia's fleet had been, there was nothing, no wreckage, no debris, just an empty void, as if the ships had never existed. But the dragons were gone too. The Indomitable's sensors searched desperately, but found no trace of the mighty beasts. They had vanished, consumed in the Gordian Gambit's reality-shattering blast. In the days that followed, the remnants of the EDF limped back to Earth. They were hailed as heroes, their impossible victory celebrated across the planet. But for Timothy, the triumph rang hollow. He stood alone in the Indomitable's hangar bay, staring at the spaces where the dragons had once rested. Tears stung his eyes as the magnitude of their sacrifice hit him. They had given everything to save humanity, to save the galaxy. "I won't let it be in vain," Timothy whispered, his voice echoing in the empty hangar. "I swear it." He turned and strode out of the hangar, his jaw set with iron resolve. The war was far from over. The Tellarites were just one threat among many in a hostile universe. And now, every enemy of Earth knew the power of the Gordian Gambit. The target on humanity's back had never been larger, but Timothy would be ready. He would honor the dragon's legacy. He would defend Earth until his last breath. No matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.